Okay, so this video is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be a story time about the stupidest thing I have ever done, and by far the worst financial decision I have ever made in my life. I'm telling this story as a lesson, I guess as an opportunity to show that even people like myself who are fairly financially savvy are certainly not immune to being impulsive and reckless at times. And I'm doing this with the hope that I can help to debunk some of the terrible financial advice that gets frequently passed around so that you don't end up making the same mistakes I did. This is a story of how I became house poor. So from the time that I was very, very young, I always dreamed of having my own house. And I'm not entirely sure where this initial desire came from because when I say young, I'm talking like elementary school age, like way too young for it to be relevant. But for as long as I can remember, I just always had this deep urge to have a place that was all my own. After I graduated high school, I made the decision not to go to university. And instead, I just started working basically minimum wage jobs, but I worked a lot. Like, if I wasn't getting full-time hours at my job, I would go get a second one. I had multiple side hustles on the go at any given time, and this continued well into my 20s. I was living at home at the time, but because I had chosen not to continue my education, the arrangement was that I had to be working, which, like I said, it absolutely was, and I also had to be contributing financially, so I did. Now, in all fairness, I certainly wasn't paying market rent, but I was paying an amount that was reasonably proportionate to my income at the time, and roughly the same as what it would have cost me had I split an apartment with a couple roommates. Beyond my bare essentials, I saved almost every penny I made. And so even though I was only making about $30,000 a year, by the time that I was 25, I had managed to save up $100,000. I've made videos in the past talking about that, and I've had people accuse me of lying, but keep in mind that $100,000 accumulated over 8 years is only about $1,000 a month, and that's even without investing it. So I was basically saving like 50 to 60% of my take-home pay. So by this point, it's 2018, I'm 25 years old, I'm living at my mom's house, and I have $100,000 in the bank. 2 years prior, I'd started a small business, so I was self-employed by this point, but my income still hadn't really increased much, and I was still side hustling and doing whatever I could to make extra money. But later that year, my business finally started to pick up some traction, and I started making closer to what was the median income for my area, which obviously still wasn't a ton, but it sure felt like a lot to me at the time. I started looking at some mortgage calculators, and I realized that with my $100,000 down payment and my new improved income, I could possibly buy myself a little house. And as soon as I realized that was a possibility, I became completely consumed by the idea. Now at this point, you're probably asking, well, why wouldn't you just rent a place? I had never lived away from home before. I was young, I was single, and I'll be the first to admit that I had no need for an entire house. But there were a few reasons. Number one was that, like many people, I was raised to see renting as throwing money away, which, as we'll talk about later, is an asinine perspective, but it's a common one nonetheless. But more importantly than that was that I had watched a few of my friends move into rentals, only for them to be forced out a year or two later because the landlord wanted to sell the place or wanted to move their family into it or wanted to renovate it or whatever else, and that was the biggest thing to me. I have always, and I still do, value stability and a sense of permanence and control more than pretty much anything else. Like, I'm a huge homebody, and the idea that someone could force me out of my home at any time was extremely distressing to me. I know a lot of people in their 20s value flexibility over stability, but I just didn't. I also had Levi at the time, and so having at least a small yard was a non-negotiable to me. And being that I'm in the Toronto area, housing is very expensive, and renting a house with a yard would have cost me more than buying at that time, at least on a month-to-month basis. And also, I was worried that if I had to dip into my $100,000 to offset more expensive rent, I would never be able to save it back up to buy a house in the future because I still wasn't making that much. So the next year, in 2019, I made it happen. I was 26, I was about to turn 27, and I bought a little townhouse. And honestly, it was great. I loved it. It was modern and cute, and the bills were reasonable. My mortgage was about $1,900 a month, which again, depending on where you live, may sound insane or very reasonable, but it's reasonable for here. And everything was Gucci, as they say. Fast forward 6 months though, and now it's March of 2020. And we all know how that went.
Stay at home.
Stay home, stay safe.
Quite simply, stay at home.
In addition to everything else, it caused the housing market to go crazy. The house 3 doors down from me hit the market and quickly sold for $50,000 more than I had just paid. A few more months go by, and another house in my neighborhood sells for $100,000 more than I had paid. It was madness. Also around this time, my business starts to really ramp up, as do my side hustles. So now I'm making what is still objectively not a ton of money, but more than I ever thought I could. Like, I'm easily paying my bills, and I'm saving and investing some money every month, which is especially easy to do when there's nowhere to go. For the first time in my life, I feel truly financially stable, and it feels great. But also, I'm home a lot more than I ever have been because of all the lockdowns. So now there are 3 things happening in tandem. Number one is that I'm making decent money for the first time ever. Number two is that I'm watching in real time as the market value of my home explodes. And number three is that I'm sitting around alone at home an awful lot and starting to nitpick at the things that bother me. And some of my complaints were valid. Like, because I had a center unit townhouse, the only access to the backyard was through the house, which meant that I literally had to carry my lawnmower through the entire house every time I cut the grass. It also meant that if I wanted to have a deck or something built, I couldn't really, because all of the materials and all the machinery and everything would have to come through the entire house, which wasn't possible. It was a dumb design. My next door neighbor and I had like maybe a foot between our front porches, and she was a smoker, so I couldn't sit outside if she was out there without being smoked out, which really bothered me. Things like that. But some of my complaints were admittedly petty. My kitchen, for example, was very well laid out for the size. I had a ton of cabinets and counter space, but I was dreaming of having this huge kitchen island with a beautiful breakfast bar and a larger backyard with a patio and a barbecue and all these things that were definitely nice to have, but not truly necessary. But as I said, I was making more money, and to me it felt like even more than it was. My house had dramatically increased in value in a very short period of time, and I felt like I could make my dreams a reality. So in March of 2021, after only being in my house for a year and a half, I started my house search all over again. Now this is the part of the story where things start to get messy. Like I said, this is definitely the stupidest thing I've ever done. Pretty much every bad decision you could possibly make in this situation, I made it. But the one thing that even I'm not dumb enough to do is to sit back and let data brokers run wild with all my personal information. With nearly every product you buy, every service you use, and every website you visit nowadays, your personal data is being collected and sold behind your back. Information like your name, your current and past addresses and phone numbers, your occupation, your workplace, your political affiliations, and even details about your family members are posted on those sketchy people search sites and made available to anyone who's willing to pay for them. This makes you vulnerable to all sorts of things like scams, harassing, stalking, doxing, and even identity theft. Like, think about getting into an argument with someone online and having them be able to find out where you live and work and do God knows what with that information. But today's sponsor, Delete Me, has got you covered. They go to work scanning the internet for your information and having it removed from anywhere it doesn't belong, all without you having to lift a finger. Then every quarter, they send you a report letting you know what they found and confirming that it's been taken care of. I've been using Delete Me myself for years now. This is my personal dashboard, and you can see that they've done nearly 10,000 searches for me in the last 2 years alone. Delete Me was recently named the #1 data removal service by Wirecutter, and not for no reason. So head over to joindeleteme.com/Nicole or scan this QR code and use the code Nicole for 20% off. And a big thanks to Delete Me for being a longtime supporter of this channel and for protecting my privacy. Now let's get back to it. Over the span of the next 12 months, I toured dozens of homes and put in offers on probably like 10 of them. What kept happening though was that I would see a house I liked and I would try to make a reasonable offer, but every time I'd get outbid by someone with deeper pockets making a firm offer with no conditions, which I just didn't feel comfortable doing. Like in a normal market, it's typical to buy a house conditional on financing and inspection. So after your offer's accepted, you usually have about a week to arrange your mortgage and a home inspection. And if for any reason you can't get the mortgage or the inspection reveals a big problem, you can back out and you can get your deposit back. But in this market, that wasn't happening. People were just going in firm and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking. Honestly, the list prices became completely irrelevant. Like, people just put a random number on the listing and the house would sell for way more than it should. So I kept putting in offers and I kept losing. And because the market was stupid, every offer I put in was higher than the one before, and often for a house that wasn't even as nice as the previous one. I decided that whatever house I get, I would use my savings to renovate it to my taste, so the inside didn't really matter to me all that much, but the prices just kept getting higher and higher. And the value of my townhouse did too, of course, but because I was buying a more expensive house, the gap between them kept just getting larger. So by March of 2022, I'd bid on and lost, like I said, probably 10 houses. And I was beyond frustrated. It is a terrible emotional roller coaster to be on, to think that you're about to get the thing that you want so badly and then get swiftly kicked in the teeth over and over and over again. I should have bowed out at this point, really. Like, I should have just been like, you know what, this market is not for me. I'm gonna wait till things calm down. But no, I was stubborn and I was determined and I was in too deep emotionally. And also, I know this is crazy, but another house down the road from me that was the exact same floor plan as mine had sold the month prior for double what I had bought it for. To clarify, the value of my home had doubled in 2.5 years. So I kept seeing prices get higher and higher every week, and I convinced myself that the longer I waited, the more out of reach it would become. And I also hadn't listed my townhouse yet because I didn't want to sell it and then I'd have nowhere to go if I didn't find something. And if I sold at one price point and then didn't buy till several months later, that gap could price me out entirely and I would have no house at all. Now here's another piece of this puzzle and a really important lesson. During this entire time, I was in touch with a mortgage broker. and she had started saying things to me that I was skeptical of right off the bat, but for some reason, I let her get in my head. I don't know if this was a worldwide thing or if it was just in Toronto, but back in 2017, we had another huge real estate bubble where low interest rates and investor speculation sent prices soaring. We had bidding wars and all that same stuff, but eventually it chilled out and prices normalized, and it took until this COVID bubble for anybody who bought back then to get their money out. And I was very aware of this, so in the back of my mind, I kind of sort of thought the same thing would happen and that maybe the market would eventually calm down again. And because of that, I was hesitant to overpay if I could just wait it out for another year or so. But when I mentioned this to my mortgage broker, she said, "Oh no, this is the new norm. We have a housing shortage here. They aren't building fast enough to keep up with immigration. There's only going to be a bigger and bigger class divide between owners and renters, and it's only going to get worse, yada, 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 yada." And to be fair, some of that is true. Like, we absolutely do have a housing shortage here, as they do in many metropolitan areas. But I knew deep down that this woman had no way of being able to predict the market, and this absolutely could have been a short-term bubble. What I didn't recognize at the time was that she was just peddling right-wing anti-immigration bullshit talking points at me and leveraging them to try to pressure me into buying a house ASAP so that she could get her bag. And even though my gut response was to question what she was telling me, or at the very least to take it with a grain of salt, I was eager to dismiss my own skepticism because I really wanted a house. And so having someone tell me that it was the right thing to do was validating and helped me to justify doing something that deep down felt like a bad move. And I'm really embarrassed about this part of the story because I feel like I'm smarter than falling for that. And even at the time, it tickled my spidey sense, but I went against my better judgment and I allowed myself to be manipulated, which is really out of character for me. Hey, by the way, since I'm bearing my soul here, maybe the least you can do is subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I'm trying to get to 250,000 subscribers, so I'd really appreciate it. Anyways, now it's March of 2022, and I see this house pop up online, so I message my realtor that I'd like to see it. And she messages back quickly that right now is the only opportunity to see it because they're taking offers the next day. The problem though is that I have to leave for work in less than an hour. So we rush this viewing. It's pouring rain, she's stuck in traffic, I'm extremely short for time. And by the time that she gets there, I run through the door trying not to get drenched, and I have less than 10 minutes to look at the place. In all honesty, I barely remember what it looked like. It kind of just looked like every other house I'd seen up to this point, which was to say like ugly, cheap builder finishings. I do remember it being pretty cluttered, but I was gonna renovate it anyways, so whatever, right? I'm in and out in a matter of minutes, and I go to work thinking that I have 24 hours to decide if I'm interested. So maybe I'll try to squeeze in one more showing the next day, and then I'll decide. After work that night, I go to my mom's for dinner, and I'm telling her about this house, and as we're talking about it, the realtor phones me, and she says that somebody's put in an offer, and now I don't have until tomorrow. I have to decide right now if I'm interested. So I say yes. I go home, and all night long, we're going back and forth in a blind bidding war with this other person. Feeling exacerbated at this point, honestly, I just wanted the whole thing to come to an end. So I made what was by far the biggest offer I'd made to date, and it was a firm offer. So I text it to my realtor, and immediately she calls me and she goes, "Nicole, are you drunk? Are you sure you want to offer this much?" Which maybe should have been my heads up to not, but I wasn't drunk. And finally at 1 a.m., I got the message. "Congratulations." Immediately, I feel overwhelmed by emotions, and I'm not even sure which ones. Like, I'm kind of happy, I'm kind of scared, I'm kind of relieved, I'm kind of wondering if I just made a huge mistake. I run a bath, I get into the tub, and I have what I now realize in retrospect was a panic attack. I was just thinking like, oh my God, I have to give up my home, this little place that I've become so happy and so comfortable in, I'm about to lose it. And this other house, I don't even remember what it looks like. I don't even know if I like it. I break into a sweat. I can hear my heart pounding in my ears. I feel all the blood rush away from my face, and I feel like I can't breathe. So I get out of the tub and I pull up this thing on my phone and I look at the photos, and immediately I have cold feet, like instant buyer's remorse. But there's nothing I can do now. The deal is firm. I just bought this house. So I spend the next 3 or 4 days scrambling to get my house listed. It hits the market 5 days after I sign the purchase agreement for the new one, and the very next day, the war between Russia and Ukraine escalates. And then there are whispers of interest rates increasing, and seemingly overnight, the bidding wars mostly stop. I got a handful of showings, but nothing like I expected, nothing like I would have got a month prior. So here I was being all cocky, thinking that my house was gonna immediately sell for top dollar in a bidding war, and I was gonna have all this extra cash to renovate with, and yada, yada, yada. But now nothing's happening. And with every day that goes by, the housing market is cooling more, and I'm freaking out. For the next 6 weeks, I had what I could only describe as a mental breakdown. Like, no joke, I would wake up every morning gasping for air and cry while I got ready for work. I would go to work and try to hold it together, but mentally I wasn't even there. I don't really know how I made it through those days, to be honest. I just remember feeling this like constant pain in my chest and like this lump in my throat and like I couldn't breathe. I'd get in my car at the end of the day and immediately break down on the drive home, and then I would sob all night until I fell asleep from exhaustion and then wake up and start again the next day. Because I had made a firm offer on the new house, I had no way of backing out. I would lose my deposit and I'd get sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but if my house didn't sell, or if it didn't sell for enough, I couldn't close the deal. Like, I didn't have the funds, right? Finally, after way too much drama, after firing my realtor, hiring a new one, and many, many tears, my house did finally sell. But it sold for $100,000 less than I had anticipated, which was a huge problem. That meant that I didn't have enough money to close on the new house, and my lender wouldn't give me a larger mortgage, so the stress actually got worse. Eventually, my mortgage broker was able to get me a larger mortgage through a different lender, but it was a lender that exists specifically for these types of situations, and so the interest rate was atrocious, and I had to pay thousands more in what I call fuck you fees. Basically fees that the lender levies on you just because they can, because they know that if you're working with them, it's because you have no other options. And in addition to all of that, my mortgage payment was significantly higher than I had planned for it to be because I was borrowing $100,000 more at that terrible interest rate. As I mentioned, the mortgage payment on my first house was about $1,900. And if everything had gone to plan, the mortgage on my new home would have been about $2,200, maybe $2,300, which I was comfortable with. But when the dust all settled, it wound up being over $3,000 a month, which is insane. That's way too much. And I never would have done any of this had I known that that's what it was going to cost me. But as a result, I became extremely house poor. If I had a good month at work, I could make my mortgage payment and all my other bills, but just barely. I wasn't saving any money at all. And if I had a bad month at work, or if I had an unexpected expense pop up, I had to dip into my savings to cover it. And I mean, I'm so grateful I had savings, but I wasn't gonna have them long at that rate. Then there was the question of the renovation, because I never would have bought the house if I had to live in it in the condition that it was. It wasn't just aesthetically not my taste, it was dirty and dingy and awful. My dishes were coming out of the dishwasher with black mold on them. My sink drain smelled like a landfill. The carpets reeked of mildew and dirty feet, and within a month of moving in, Levi got fleas for the first and only time in his entire life. The vet suggested it very well could have been from the carpets. Then of course, because that wasn't enough, the AC started acting up and I had electrical problems, and basically everything that could go wrong did go wrong within the first month or two of moving in, and I couldn't live like that. In addition to all the financial stress, I was just spiraling from feeling icked out and uncomfortable and not knowing what was going to go wrong next. My original plan was just to renovate bit by bit as I could save up, but I couldn't live with fleas in the carpets and no AC and a kitchen that stunk like a dirty diaper. So I did something that I would typically never do, and something that I would never ever advise anyone else to do, and I took on even more debt. I took out a small loan to renovate with, and I hired the most affordable contractors I could find, and I DIY'd anything that I could DIY, and I got the house to a point where at least I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's filth. And to be honest with you, debt or no debt, that's the best move I made in this entire mess. I couldn't live here otherwise. In a level-headed market, nobody would have been stupid enough to buy the house in the condition that I bought it in. And I didn't know if I was going to stay or go, but I knew that either way, something had to go because I couldn't live here like this, and I probably couldn't sell it in that condition either. For the next 2 years, I worked my absolute ass off. That's an understatement, really. I was working probably 60 hours a week on average. I would be on the road all day for my day job, and I kept up all my side hustles, and then I'd come home at night and eat dinner and work on this channel until 2 a.m. every single night and all weekend long. I distinctly remember sitting in my little office one night. It was a Tuesday night, and I had to get a video submitted to a brand for approval that night, and it was after 1 a.m. and my computer was lagging to hell, and I'd worked all day, and I was just so burnt out, and I just started crying from exhaustion and frustration, but I felt like I deserved it. I've always had this bad habit of being really hard on myself, but I felt that this is what I got for being greedy and stubborn and unappreciative of what I had before. I felt so much shame for the situation I put myself in and the stress I'd caused my family and everything else. Honestly, it's been 4 full years now, and it's pretty much taken me until now to be able to talk about this openly without getting emotional. But finally, after hustling my ass off for 2 straight years and thankfully seeing some growth here on YouTube to the point that I was basically working 2 full-time jobs at once, I was able to pay off the entire renovation loan and put down a bit of a lump sum payment on the mortgage and then refinance it to a more manageable payment so that I could finally take my foot off the gas a little. And honestly, everything's fine now. My bills are affordable, I've managed to increase my income year over year, I've renovated most of the house, and I'm very comfortable here now. This is my home. But was it worth all the chaos to get here? Hell no, not by a long shot. And I shouldn't fail to mention that my house is currently worth about 30% less than I paid for it 4 years ago. So no. Buying a house is not always a good investment. And I think that's the takeaway here. I'm very fortunate to be in a good financial spot now. I can afford my mortgage and everything's fine, but I'm very aware of the fact that I currently pay considerably more each month to own this house than I could be paying to rent something equivalent. In fact, there's a similar house for lease down the road from me right now, and the rent is about $1,500 less per month than I'm spending after accounting for my mortgage, property tax, utilities, insurance, maintenance, etc. And that's not even factoring in the money that I spent for the down payment and the renovations and everything else. Financially, I would be much better off right now renting that house and investing an extra $1,500 a month into the stock market. In 25 years from now, my stock portfolio would be worth equal or more than my house will be when it's paid off. So the idea that renting is throwing money away is absurd and wrong. The idea that you're just paying your landlord's mortgage is also stupid because I couldn't even rent out my house for enough to make a profit in this market if I tried to. And also, when you go out to a restaurant for dinner, do you consider that paying the chef's mortgage? No, you're paying for a service, you're paying for a meal. And when you're paying rent, you're paying for somewhere to live. It's the same thing. When you rent, you're also not responsible for maintenance and repairs. If you decide you don't like the place, you can just up and move once your lease ends. There are a lot of benefits. So all of that is to say that both renting and owning have various perks. Renting can and often does make more financial sense nowadays. Buying can provide you with a stronger sense of stability and permanence if that's something that's important to you, but obviously it comes at a financial cost. What makes more sense for you depends on what you value and what you can afford and what your plans are for the next 10 plus years. It's not black and white. Either way, I can't stress enough how important it is to run all the numbers properly, consider all your options, and block out all the noise and the bullshit that tries to tell you there's only one correct answer, because there isn't. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but the real estate market in North America is set up in a way to benefit everybody but you, the buyer. Even the people who are supposed to be representing you have a conflict of interest because your realtor, your mortgage broker, your lender, and pretty much anyone else who's involved in the transaction only gets paid if you successfully buy a home. And the more you pay for that home, the more they get paid. So they have no incentive to give you good advice or really even advocate for you at all. Personally, I love being a homeowner. I actually enjoy the upkeep. I feel a deep sense of self in the place that I live. And now that I can afford it, I'm happy to pay a premium for this lifestyle. But none of this was worth the stress to get here. None of this was worth being so house poor for years and having to work so hard just to barely stay afloat. None of this was worth the months of serial panic attacks and lost sleep and just feeling so deeply uprooted and upset in every possible way. So ultimately, do what makes you happy, whether that's renting or owning. Run the numbers, see what you can afford, and decide what makes the most sense for you. But don't do what I did. If you like this video, like the video, subscribe for more. You can follow me on Instagram at according_to_Nicole. Don't forget to check out Delete Me at the link in the description or scan this QR code right here to keep yourself protected online. And leave me a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on this whole mess. I have touched on this situation over various of my much older videos, and so I figured I would make this video, like I said, kind of as like a little cautious tale, but also as a little update for all of the people who have been with me over the last 4 years. And yeah, other than that, thank you guys so much as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.